The idea for if Paul were a cyclist came to me one day when, at a point in my life, my mother had passed away in an untimely fashion. And the only way that I could deal with the crippling grief was to go on extraordinarily long bike rides. And coming back one August afternoon, it crossed my mind that the scriptures I'd been studying at the time might fit into a novel in a way that we could identify with on an everyday basis, everyday level. And so I started writing and came up with a series of events that I had tied together, more or less knitted together from people and characters and events in my own life that I thought would make a good story. So I sat down and started writing, and at the time I was studying the book of Acts and the writings of the Apostle Paul. And I noticed that things on these long rides, interesting events would happen that would make me stop and think about something Paul had written about. And then one day I thought, well, you know, if Paul were a cyclist, what would he say about this? Or where would he direct me? And I had also noted in church that people have a strong, powerful hunger to be able to tie what the scriptures actually write and teach, to tie that to daily events. And I know that sounds like an oversimplification, that we ought to be able to do that every day, but we can't. It's really not that easy. The Bible is a difficult book to understand in a lot of cases and subject to debate vehemently over the centuries, contextually speaking. So what I did was I tried to tie certain scriptures, particularly the Apostle Paul had taught, and laced them together in a series of events. They came up with a storyline that is done from a believer's standpoint. So a lot of the things in this story would be things that Christians would automatically, easily identify with. And the story itself is not that unique, except that it ties together many of the precepts throughout the Bible that we can apply in a modern, contemporary way, but are truly ageless, that have been truths from the day they were penned. And I thought, well, let's put this together in a way that has a good storyline and can capture people's attention, and I hope it does that. And also, while I have the attention of the reader, to lace in as much scripture teaching as I can cram into that short time. The mission that I had for the book is actually twofold. The first is that whether you like it or not, or whether you identify with anything in it or not, I hope and pray that this work helps people to stop and examine where God is at in their life. Where do they make a place for Him? Or how much of their life do they decide to let God into? That's number one. Irregardless of any other points, I hope that it makes people stop and think about where their walk with God is at in any point in their life. And the second thing was, I was thinking, how can I write this in a way that would tempt people to actually open up their Bibles and see what it says about a given scripture and a given set of circumstances. Because we all know that we can almost tailor-make different parts of the scripture to rationalize anything in our lives. We need it to be consistent with the teachings and the ideas of where we draw those particular scriptures from. So I thought, how can I help people to, how would it pique their curiosity to actually say, well, what was it that the scripture was saying? So I tried my best to write it in that fashion too, and I hope that I did that. But in any case, I hope it stops and makes people think to what extent they're letting God walk with them in their daily lives. And I would think that most all people would have at least lived some of the things that I wrote in this book, and they crossed this path themselves. And I hope that in itself makes this work worthwhile to read and helps maybe you out there say, gee, I'm not the only one that this happened to, and I'm not the only one that had these thoughts, and I'm not the only one that struggled with this. Because one thing I tried to point out is that the scriptures say emphatically that there will be mysteries we will never have an answer to, and we've got to find a way to be okay with that. And God promises that He'll fill that void with something that you would fill with an answer. You'll be able to deal with it somehow. Even in the case of great heartache, great disaster, you'll find a way. God will provide a way for you to be able to cope with it and deal with it. You've got to know Him. You've got to make room for Him in your life so that He can displace that grief for you, or that anger, or that frustration, because you can't have grace with those false idols standing in the way. I hope that you enjoy the book as much as I enjoyed writing it.